Sergei Lavrov says Japan has crossed the bounds of decency simply for protesting Vladimir Putin's visit to territory Tokyo still claims as its own. Putin has just made his first visit to Iturup, one of 4 islands controlled by Moscow but claimed by Japan, which calls them its northern territories. The Soviet Union seized the islands in the final days of the Second World War, and the dispute has prevented the two countries from ever signing a formal peace treaty. Tokyo lodged a formal protest. Lavrov's answer was anything but diplomatic.
Our Japanese colleagues and neighbors have, of course, crossed the bounds of decency with their completely unacceptable statements that the President of the Russian Federation cannot visit any part of the territory of the Russian Federation.
And while Lavrov was lecturing Japan about diplomatic matters, the same news conference produced a rather less comfortable subject for Moscow. Ghana raised requests concerning missing foreign fighters. Lavrov said those cases are now being handled by the Russian Defense Ministry.
We have explained that all of this is under the control of the Defense Ministry. There were also such requests from a number of other countries. There is a special department in the Defense Ministry that considers, and I'm convinced will consider, additional requests, which have been received today from Ghanaian friends.
Russia is now threatening to make its campaign against Western military support for Ukraine much tougher. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow intends to intensify attacks on the networks that bring Western weapons and military equipment into Ukraine. He also says Russia has sent a list of questions to the US State Department demanding explanations about what Moscow claims is American involvement in Ukrainian deep strikes, including the use of intelligence.
We will not stoop to Ukraine's methods. But we will make our own methods much tougher in order to dismantle everything that fuels Kyiv's war machine from the West. And we are already doing this. They are already starting to moan.
Russia says it will not stop to Ukraine's methods while simultaneously promising harsher action against the logistics that keep Ukraine alive. The distinction becomes particularly creative when Moscow itself is being supplied with the missiles, artillery ammunition, and military support from North Korea. And the same inversion is now being applied to the Black Sea. A Russian-installed official in occupied Crimea, Vladimir Konstantinov, has dismissed Ukraine's proposal to halt attacks on civilian targets in the Black Sea as bluff and hypocrisy. He claims Kyiv only became interested in restraint after Russian strikes disrupted maritime logistics into Ukrainian ports.
All such initiatives from the Ukrainian side are bluff and hypocrisy. They began the attacks on commercial vessels in the Black Sea, and now, after retaliatory strikes by our army disrupted maritime logistics supplying military cargo to Ukrainian ports, Kyiv has suddenly sounded the alarm and come forward with this hypocritical initiative.
Konstantinov goes further and argues that Ukraine should be deprived of maritime access altogether because, he says, commercial routes are being used to bring in weapons. It is an extraordinary argument from an occupation administration representing the country that invaded Ukraine. In occupied Sevastopol, petrol is still being rationed through QR codes, with the motorists facing purchase limits. The system was introduced after repeated disruption to supply routes and Russian refineries early this summer. Reuters documented queues, 20 liters limits, and temporary suspensions when fuel trucks simply could not reach the city. Crimea has also been dealing with recurring power cuts and mobile communication failures as Ukrainians' attacks hit energy and supply infrastructure. Russian-installed authorities have acknowledged that mobile base stations can run only for a limited number of hours on backup power. In some areas, public street telephones have even been brought back for emergency calls when mobile networks fail. Reuters reported in July that the peninsula had suffered fuel shortages, power outages, reduced public transport, and shortened business hours. Russia is facing a second wave of fuel shortages after a fresh round of Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries. Petrol has again disappeared from some stations in the Moscow region, while authorities in at least 10 regions have tightened controls on fuel sales. The crisis first accelerated in May eased briefly at the end of July and has now returned after renewed attacks on refining infrastructure. Moscow has already banned fuel exports, relaxed quality standards, and turned to imports in an attempt to stabilize the domestic market.
Fuel shortages have returned to some regions of Russia in August, prompting local authorities in at least 10 regions to again tighten controls on sales of motor fuel at petrol stations. Reuters witnesses reported on Monday that gasoline was once again unavailable at some fuel stations in the Moscow region, although diesel fuel was available at almost all stations. The fuel crisis, which began gaining momentum in May and by July had spread to almost all regions of Russia, follows the shutdown of several refineries hit in drone attacks and a seasonal rise in demand. By the end of July, the situation had stabilized, and in some regions restrictions were lifted or significantly eased. However, this respite did not last long. Sales of gasoline have fallen by an average of 20% at the St. Petersburg International Mercantile Exchange since the beginning of August versus the second half of July.
The Kremlin can threaten Ukraine's supply lines all at once, but the more refineries Ukraine reaches, the more Russia is being forced to manage the war at the petrol pump, with the queues, rationing, and emergency imports becoming part of ordinary life. Russia's nuclear flagship is facing a very different kind of a problem abroad. Politico reports that Egypt's nuclear authorities have raised serious safety concerns over Rosatom's works at the Daba nuclear plant, including construction defects and what one document describes as deliberate negligence. The stakes go well beyond Egypt.
Documents reviewed by Politico describe repeated serious concrete defects across several reactor units. Inspectors found voids behind metal lining, defects in foundation slabs, and problems in the cylindrical wall of one reactor building. Egypt's nuclear authority accused Rosatom of misleading practices and fake work, saying the company's claims about construction progress did not match what could actually be seen on site. The documents also describe workers using fake passes, impersonating others to gain unauthorized access, and being caught with banned alcohol. And after one worker suffered a serious open fracture, Egyptian authorities say he was moved secretly in a private car rather than taken by the site ambulance, allegedly to conceal the accident.
For Rosatom, this is not just an Egyptian embarrassment. The same company is still trying to convince Europe that Russian nuclear technology is safe, dependable, and somehow separate from the Kremlin's war machine in Ukraine. Kim Jong-un is making one thing very clear, that North Korea's relationship with Russia is not a temporary wartime arrangement. In a message to dictator Putin, Kim said the two countries would keep deepening their ties and described their relationship as a continuation of their joint struggle and long tradition of friendship. The message came in response to Putin's greeting marking 81 years since Japan's surrender in World War II. Putin said Moscow and Pyongyang would continue expanding cooperation in all areas, and by now the phrase carries very real weight. North Korean troops have already fought alongside Russia, while Pyongyang has supplied missile and ammunition used in the war against Ukraine. What used to sound like diplomatic language is increasingly looking like a military alliance being built in real time. And while Russia is trying to overwhelm Ukraine with the mass drone attacks, former Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov says the biggest story is that Ukraine is already shaping the next generation of warfare. In his first sit-down interview for an international audience since leaving government with an Irish journalist, Caelan Robertson, he argued that Ukraine is not simply adapting anymore, it is writing the doctrine others will eventually have to follow. Cheap autonomous systems, drones hunting drones, robots replacing soldiers in the most exposed positions. Fedorov says this is where the battlefield is heading, and many NATO militaries are still behind the curve.
Ukraine is giving birth to the doctrine of future warfare. Ukraine has become the drone capital of the world and, more broadly, a center of defense technology. The rules of a new global security system are being written in Ukraine, and the reality is that many NATO countries are not ready for the war of the future. I have had many meetings with defense ministers across NATO, and our task has always been to explain what is happening on the battlefield, how we reach this stage, and what comes next. Today, in effect, Ukraine is writing the doctrine of a new global security system, one built on cheap, autonomous technologies that can allow even a small country to defend itself against a much larger threat.
And that is why his dismissal has become more than a personal story. Hundreds marched through central Kyiv demanding Fedorov's return as a defense minister and greater dialogue from the government. The protests moved from the Arch of Freedom through Khreshchatyk toward the presidential office, part of demonstrations that have now continued for about a month.
The protests have been going on for about a month now. And today there are so many people here. And there will be a march because we want to remind everyone that we are still here. Parliament returns from recess this Monday, and we want them to come back to work with the full confidence that we have not forgotten. And we will stand until the end, until the decisions demanded by the Ukrainian people are made.
Ukraine's parliament returns to work after its summer recess, and demonstrators say they expect lawmakers to address the future leadership of the defense ministry. Fedorov's dismissal triggered protests in Kyiv in July. Many of those taking part say they saw his tenure as a period of a rapid technological change inside the military of Ukraine.
I came out on the first day spontaneously against Fedorov's dismissal as defense minister. Because, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people I consider authorities, first and foremost, my friends who are serving in the military, they noted many positive things about his work. This primarily concerns material support.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe on my personal channel, Not Just Politics.